Hi everybody, it's Francesca Barbini from Luna Press Publishing. One of the questions that we get asked often from not just our authors but new authors is about conventions and what are they and what good can they do for you as a writer. So today I am simply going to address what are conventions and how can they be useful for you as a writer. I am going to start by talking about in-person conventions, and I'm going to leave the digital side of things afterwards. Okay, so let's start with the physical one. So the first thing you want to do is you want to find out where the conventions are, and not just that, but conventions for the genre that you write about. Okay, internet has many lists. Now, as you know, Luna Press deals with speculative fantasy and science fiction. Therefore, I will go and follow specific conventions. In particular, of course, the one in the UK. But because of the digital side, I can also now attend a lot of the conventions overseas. Now, so let's come back to Britain, and let's assume for a moment that you're also a writer of SFF, and you have then created a list of the conventions to go to. Generally speaking, you will find that there are conventions devoted to fantasy, those devoted to science fiction. People like myself in the SFF community tend to attend both kind of conventions, the one for fantasy, the one for science fiction, as often they will deal with both anyways. So I will know which one they are, and I found out simply by being part of the community. You can find out online, on social media, and you can also Google SFF convention, science fiction convention, and a lot of them will pop up. So the first thing you want to do perhaps is to maybe create a spreadsheet where you list the conventions, where they are, if they are a recurring one, like a cyclical event, for example, like EasterCon, which is the science fiction British convention, and which is also always held over the Easter weekend, and that's why we call it EasterCon, even though every year it has a different name. Then, of course, there is FantasyCon, which is the fantasy UK convention. And again, this type of conventions tend to go about the country, and this is because the organizers are volunteers, so there isn't one specific team. But then, of course, there are other type of conventions which tend to be in the same place, like Satellite, which is in Glasgow, and you also have festivals like Chimera, which is in Edinburgh, and it's generally in the same place as well. Okay, so you can find out about all of them either through following a publishers, because, for example, I always talk about conventions we're going to in our newsletter, but equally, I find out about a lot of conventions through social media. So once you find a convention that is closer to you, that suits you best, or that you fancy taking a look at, you register. And generally speaking, during the registration phase, they will also ask you if you are interested in being a dealer, as in someone that wants to sell merchandise that would be fitting for that kind of convention, because there is always a dealer's room. So, for example, from my point of view, I always tick the dealers because, of course, I sell the Luna Press books. But there are a lot of individual authors that take a table to sell their own books. Equally, you will find, shops that sells steampunk paraphernalia and, like goggles and hats and corsets, etc. But honestly, there is such an amazing variety of sellers. And you become friends with all of them. The dealers have, their own little clan, because we spend most of the convention inside the dealer's room, of course. But, a convention without a dealer's room, it feels very different because, of course, we represent our authors, which will be there at the convention. So it's a very nice way of meeting people and talking to people, of course. So you have the option of ticking the box about wanting to be in the dealer's room. Or there is another box generally that says, do you want to be part of the program? So that is if you are intending to volunteer for any of the activities. And I'm going to explain each of them in a minute. And finally, if you want to be a volunteer, because remember that these conventions are all run by volunteers, people that are part of the fandom, writers themselves, so very often. So once you've done that and you send in, then time will pass. And as we get closer to the convention, you will receive progress reports from the organizing committee, which also known as the PR, and they're generally via email, because if you want them on print these days, you probably have to pay a surcharge, but there's really no need. And they will tell you how they're doing, and they will also notify you of opportunities. So they will also have links for who's organizing the programming, who's organizing dealers. So if you need to contact the relevant person, you can just email them directly. But normally what they do is they send out a form where you, as say, for example, there are a lot of opportunities. So they send out a form for each of them. So before I mention dealers, and I've already explained that if you have a table of merch to sell, books, your own, other people, if you're a publisher, or just in general, jewelry, anything that you think will be suitable for a convention, then you will contact them and they will keep you up to date with what you need to do. Programming, and this is the big one, okay? So from an author perspective, first of all, never think that to be on the program, you have to be a seasoned, multi-published writer. Absolutely not. In fact, if you are going to a convention, I would recommend, if you can, of course, because if it doesn't suit your personality, there are easier ways, to dip your toes into the water, as it were. But if you feel comfortable, why don't volunteer to be on a panel, for example, or to lead a workshop? So there are many things you can do. You can propose the kind of panel you would like to be on. Normally, they will get you to tick boxes on topics so that they know where are the areas that you're more comfortable with, and they can then pair you up with other people so that you can be, for example, like part of a panel. If the panel feels a little bit too daunting, then remember the workshop is another opportunity for you to interact. Maybe you have a specialty or something that you can offer the crowd of a convention. And it could be, a workshop on bow and arrow. There are a lot of fantasy authors that perhaps would be interested in that. And if you have that expertise, why not share it through a workshop? There are, of course, writing workshops that could be put on offer. And equally, because the workshop, it's a little bit more cozy, you normally have 10, 15 people, depending obviously on the kind of workshop. So it allows you to sort of ease yourself into it. Another thing you can do if you want to have perhaps even more of a relaxing experience is to offer a reading. There is always reading slots available generally at convention. So if you say, I would like to do a reading, it could be from a book you're working on, and it will allow you maybe to test the water a little bit, or it's a book that is coming out, and so you're reading a little bit of it so that people can be interested and curious about it. But it can also be done as part of a group of debut authors, often there are panels for new authors, debut authors, and that is a really nice thing to do. Or if you feel that you don't want to be part of the panelist, for example, but you feel comfortable in moderating, maybe because that's also the job you have, I don't know, but you're comfortable with that, you could be the moderator of a panel. So again, you would specify that in the form. So when they put the program together, they will then contact you and say, okay, we would like you to do this, and that. And then it's you to say, well, actually, I'd rather not do this, or I prefer to, and suggest maybe alternatives. So during the making of the program, that is, if you want to be on the program, if it's your first convention and you feel, oh my God, this is going to be a bit too much, it's enough that I'm showing up, I don't want to be overwhelmed, then it's also fine. You're just going to go, enjoy it. It's your first convention. Nobody expects you to jump straight in and, be in every room in all the streams, so don't worry about it. And with that said, I would recommend that if you feel comfortable, definitely give it a shot, because after all, the main point of conventions really is to network, to socialize, and to make friends. And a lot of the friends we made at conventions are still some of our closest friends today, especially because they are the people that understands the things you love. Sometimes your colleagues, maybe at your day job, but they might not really be into the whole fantasy and science fiction. So your friends at convention become the ones that really understand what you're going through, especially if they're also writers like yourself. So it's always worth, in any case, it's always worth being there for that. A very important part of the convention, I mentioned friends for a reason. And this is because at conventions, you really do meet friends among writers, among publishers. And so the whole social aspect of a convention really is an amazing networking opportunity. Often you'll hear people say that at the bar of the con is where you make the biggest deal for a publisher, because you start to talk, you start to discuss project, and you never know, one thing leads to another, and here you go, you've got an offer to submit a manuscript, for example. So it's always worth remembering that it is really an amazing opportunity. But yes, still, you are also relaxing, so you don't want to be in anybody's face or just shoving a manuscript in someone's plate. But at the same time, it gauge a little bit how things are going. You're part of a conversation, you know what to do, and it becomes a really nice way of getting to know people. So the convention bar, certainly, just like the dealer's room, as I was saying at the beginning, it's an amazing place to really just break the ice and just start to make friends and talk to publishers. Because, like I said, I'm not the only publishers that go to convention. Most of my colleagues will be there from all the independent presses, and sometimes from the bigger store shops as well, from the bigger publisher. You'll find a lot of us with a table at the bigger conventions for sure. So definitely remember that. Now, speaking of costs, yes, of course, conventions can be costly because you have to consider the traveling there, you have to consider accommodation, and of course, food and drinks, a lot of them. But no matter what they are, even if you're not actually drinking alcohol, is the fact that you are still often in an hotel. And so the prices aren't necessarily the cheapest one. So what do we do for that? Well, there are a lot of things you can do. You can, of course, organize yourself depending on where you live. That's why before I said have a list of conventions, see which one are the ones that are closer to you maybe. You never know, you might even be able to commute and come back in the evening, so you don't have to spend on the hotel cost. But equally, take a look at the hotels that are around the main convention hotel, because there might be a cheaper one, which is literally at 10 meters down the road. So you don't necessarily have to stay in the main hotel. So take a look at various offers, Airbnbs, all places that you can rent there and about. When it comes to food, no one is going to stop you from, adding a few extra things to your bag, from snacks for the morning, so you don't have to have the breakfast included, but equally, snacks during the day. And also, you don't have to use the bar or the restaurant of the hotel. You can just step outside. Most of these hotels are within easy reach of supermarkets. You can just grab a sandwich there, or the nearest petrol station, really. So there are ways of making it a lot cheaper. There is always going to be free water as well. So just, get your bearings on where you are and organize your food and your sleep accordingly. So those are little tricks, if you like, that you can do to save a little bit of money, because they really aren't cheap. Especially if you're a dealer, then you have to pay for the parking, of course, etc. So all little things to remember. Now, and because we are on the topic of cost, I'm now going to mention a little bit about the digital side of things. And now, one of the things that COVID did was to push a lot of sectors into using digital side of things a lot more. It did that with schools, of course, and conventions, incredibly so. And obviously during COVID, we had conventions running completely online. And then when the restriction eased, we went back to in person, but equally there was such a big request from the fandom to maintain a digital stream that pretty much all the major conventions will have digital streams running along. There are, of course, conventions which even to these days are completely online, like Flights of Foundry, because of course there are people coming from all over the world, so you can see that the programming runs like 24 hours a day because someone of that time zone will be up to watch. But in terms of the digital, conventions are doing these hybrid forms with more or less acceptable result. Not very acceptable for some, more acceptable for others, because also don't forget the conventions were already dealing with a lot of other things to take into account, such as disabilities, for example. So how can you make a convention friendly to people with disabilities? So equally, the digital side of things requires a really big thought into it, because don't forget what I said, these conventions are run by volunteers. It isn't guaranteed that every year you're gonna achieve a great result, but hopefully with the passage of time and more people becoming used to the idea of having a hybrid convention, then things should become a lot easier. I have actually done book launches with one author live and one author on screen. And I have seen entire panels being streamed whilst the audience was there physically. So there are a lot of ways that these things can be done. And why is that good? It's good because if you cannot travel physically to a convention for whatever reason, from health to money, then you are now able to attend. So this is a real improvement for sure in terms of allowing people to be there. So to recap, if a new artist or a new writer asks, should I go to convention? Should I be bothered? Is it gonna do anything good for me? Then the answer is yes. They really, really can do, because actually to meet a lot of the people you perhaps interact with online already, and to actually meet them and get to know them, it creates not just a bigger sense of community. If you think about the hashtag writing community that you have on Twitter, Mastodon, and all other social media, it really does open a lot of doors. You get to meet the publisher, you get to meet writers who have achieved a high level of publications. Maybe they're published by traditional publishers, and of course agents are always there. And don't forget that in a lot of these conventions they also have the awards as well, so you get to perhaps get a better understanding of how these things work. So all in all, it is a great opportunity. And if you cannot go in person, the online digital stream, it's something that can help you achieve that interaction, because there are things that you can do, like cafe clutches, which are moments where, say, for example, an author, a publisher, or an agent, or a writer, like I said, they can have a sort of, imagine a physical space, but equally a digital space, where you can discuss particular issue in a much more confined atmosphere, and cozy atmosphere, where you can discuss and get a lot of answers. For example, I do cafe clutches on publishing, so I can have a group of 5, 6, 10 people, whatever, asking questions for half an hour, whatever time is allotted to us, and really get into the into the nitty gritty of but what does it mean? What do I need to do? Etc. So very useful. So even if you can only do it digitally, there are opportunities. And don't forget that this convention, and I keep stressing this because people don't often appreciate this, these conventions are run by volunteers, and without them, we wouldn't have the amazing amount of opportunities that we have, at least here in the UK, but I'm sure it's the same in many other countries. So if you feel that you can contribute to help make, say, one aspect or the other, the physical or the digital, better, by all means, volunteer, even if it's just for one day or for a specific thing, because without the volunteers and the people that create the dealer's room, the people that volunteer for programming, we wouldn't have a convention, okay? So, it's all down to us. Festivals are a different breed all together, and we're going to talk about that another time. So if you if you have your own experience of conventions and you want to leave them in the comments, please feel free. Equally, if you have any questions, let me know. But in any case, I hope if you do go that you have a great experience. It is still a place with many people, so of course not every experience can go smoothly, but there are a lot of people to try and work very hard to make sure that the experience is a positive one. Okay, and if you do go, I hope you have a great time to your convention, your first convention. Okay, thank you very much, and maybe see you there. Bye.